What I'm going to do today is, I suppose, do two things. One is take you through what I think should be achievable in the first 12 weeks of any digital transformation, and how making the right decisions early on will allow you leverage AI in the future. But as well, I want to, I suppose, there'll be the first few slides are things and pitfalls that I've seen, mistakes I've seen people make, mistakes that I've made that really gave a lot of technical debt as we were learning. So to try and highlight these. Before we get started, can I ask, I suppose, who here would be an end user, has a manufacturing plant or there? Okay, good, we have a couple. And then machine builders? Is anyone who builds machines? No. The rest, system integrators, consultants, create software for things. Okay, perfect. Can I ask a second question, and this will tell how well my presentation might go. Who here has built a unified namespace? Okay, few, but okay, right. There's a lot of people who haven't, which is good, because I'm talking about the first 12 weeks. So the first point, and this was a slide that I used where I had a presentation showing how you could generate $1 million of savings in your first 12 weeks. And those of us who work in engineering, who work for companies, know to start your digital transformation journey, you've got to convince somebody in finance to give you the money. But digital transformation is not about that. It's we're changing the way we do business. I always ask the question, imagine if I could show your CFO, we can save $2 million a year by going back to post. We'll have an internal post, we'll get rid of email, the servers are costing too much money, we have to power them, we've got a massive IT department minding email, let's go back to post. They'd look at you like you were crazy. And in 10 years' time, that will be the attitude for digital transformation. So yes, the rest of the presentation that I gave a week ago was about how you can get $1 million on an ROI of about a 250,000 spend. But so I think those of us who are more technical, and I think the type of people that come to these conferences are, we have to stop in one way justifying the financial and say that these are the opportunities we have. Look at how much faster email is. With email, we're operating at the speed of our thought, essentially. With digital transformation, we move from operating at the speed of Excel to operating at the speed of the information that's coming into us. So this is the second one. This is where I see things that go wrong. Digital transformation for me is quite simple. And yet you go to LinkedIn and everyone says 80% of digital transformations fail. And I struggled with this for a long time. I was like, how? And I've worked on big projects that, very much of this size. And I kind of went, it's not that they fail. It's actually they cost too much and take too long. And why? You've got your traditional big consultancy who, they'll come in, you'll pay 60, 100,000 for a report, and they'll tell you not an awful lot of new information, but when they're doing that, they'll propose to you a large vendor, someone they're familiar with, someone that is a reputable name that they won't get in trouble for recommending. Excuse me. So that locks you into, they start to push you towards the legacy software players. They push you towards the legacy software players, and they, have their software that tends to, again, be high cost. You're paying millions in licenses. It's hard to get the data out. Sometimes they say you don't own the data you've put in. And now they then direct you towards system integrators who think this software is brilliant and they're very happy with what they have and how clever they've been to solve some problems. And all of these are working from an infrastructure where they need multi-year $1 million projects to feed their business. So they can only think in multi-year $1 million projects. And I suppose I started my company. Sorry, I never introduced myself. I'm the CEO of Carlisle Engineering. As I say, also I'm all of Carlisle Engineering. I provide a system architecture consultancy, very bespoke. Do some software programming, though also, when challenged last night, I'll do whatever somebody asks me to do if it's the right solution. But I had worked for a large fizzy drink company, and normally everyone's like, no, not that one, the other one. And we did that multi-million. I think we spent 2.5 million on licenses, 5 million on system integrators. It took 3 years. At the end of it, I was completely burnt out. I left the job. 3 other people who were on the internal team I know also left. I'm like, we're a client. We're supposed to have the easy life. Coming from a system integrator background, I was like, so I started that really to try and not be making the mistakes, not pushing people down this, multi-million-dollar, multi-year route. The biggest problem is it takes 3 years to get value. 6 months in, you've written your spec. 3 months later, you've learned something new. You can't go back and change the spec. There's too much momentum. You've learned something and you can't go, there's a better way to do it. I want to change something. So, that's the biggest, I suppose, loss you have in these projects. So this is very much the approach. And I think, over the last 6 months, I've really seen, companies, industries are starting to get it. That in digital transformation, you want to do lots of small, agile projects. You do a project, you learn from it, you do the next one better, and you build in. And then a lot of the rest of the presentation is, you don't want to learn everything on the first project. You want to have a reasonably good foundation and stepping stone where you can take it, But you do that, you learn as you go, so you get that experience. You solve more problems. And normally after you do a proof of concept, you had an idea of what you were going to do second and third and fourth. Yeah, normally you do the same thing second. The third thing, it's a 50-50 at best. That's now your new problem because you've learned so much. And anything more than 4, 5, 6, less than 10%. So, and people then get, okay, that's going to be very slow. But what happens is you gain momentum very quickly and you scale in 3 ways. I've started with companies and we've done a proof of concept. We have a team that builds it. They put one function on one machine. Then they put a second function on that machine. We're now maybe 20 weeks in. Now we get another team, maybe not quite as good as the first team, but they now start to take those and roll the existing functionality out to more machines. Meanwhile, the first team, they're putting more and more functionality in, they're building up the system. And of course, sometimes you'll do an enterprise function that goes to all machines, but you start to scale on those machines. And then you get to a point where you go, okay, we can start rolling out all of this functionality to all the machines in Plant B, Plant C. So very quickly you start to gain that momentum. This is my LinkedIn. You read LinkedIn, and there's a lot of things, and I'm not even suggesting that the previous speakers were anywhere close to this, but it does feel sometimes it's a unified namespace. It'll solve all your problems. It'll get ready for AI. Connect your machines, put them to a broker, and connect an AI agent, and then magic will happen. And I see that a lot, and unfortunately, it's not that simple. So the way I think about it, and I think this is the mistake people often make when they're thinking about it, that MQTT moves messages, it's the mailman. The UNS, that gives you meaning within those messages. And by breaking that distinction, you can really start to understand what you're trying to do. So MQTT is the transport, it's not the architecture. A true UNS, really what you as an architect or you as the person building it have to do is you have to add in that context, structure, and meaning. One of the best things about MQTT is there is no schema for you to follow. You can do whatever you want. One of the worst things about MQTT, there is no schema. You can do whatever you want. So you have to build those rules on with governance. And one of the things I hate seeing is you look at somebody who's demoing a unified namespace, or you go in and they have enterprise plant, nice ISA, temperature, and they're inside the temperature payload 29.5, and you're okay. What is it, Celsius, Fahrenheit? There's no payload structure. Lovely payload structure you showed. I really did. I appreciated that. It sparked joy when I saw it, because there are people who I know should know better in their demos. Show that, and I think then people think, okay, I don't have to, and I suppose 3 months into using a unified namespace, I kind of went, okay, I really have to get a handle on the payload we're going to use for the entire, I have to write it down. I have to tell other people. There has to be some structure around this. So look, without your semantic hierarchy and standard payloads, you're really just streaming chaos. Now, by chaos, it's as chaotic as a data lake. I don't like data lakes because let's build the context from the start. So, and that's something as well. You can have MQTT and you can be still stuck in Industry 3.0. I know it sounds like I'm bashing MQTT, but I'm not. Everything I build there. So what do we need to do to add to our broker to make it a unified namespace? And there are certainly a lot of products out there. I haven't played with Pulse enough yet to really get in there, but that help us with this. But this is the things you have to be, thinking about. Have I? I don't know. A bit small. So the structured hierarchy, everybody gets that. Everybody will have it follow ISA. I don't think that's there. Normalizing payloads, using common field names and consistent structure. What do we call temperature? If you open a PLC, the temperature might as likely be temp as temperature. It might be written in a different language. I've had a couple of PLCs written in French that I've had to take over, and it's challenging. But and if you have an organization that's going to have different languages, you need to start. Okay, let's normalize on our names. The consistency, they have to reflect business values. Things like vendor names, IP addresses don't make sense to be in there. There's a lot of things that don't make sense. Especially when you ask yourself, and what happens if we move this machine? Do we have to rename it? Do we have to? The discipline, we have to make sure that devices or systems published in our agreed format, or we allow them publish in whatever format they want, and then we have to take that raw data and normalize it and make it fit our unified namespace. So I mentally, yeah.
In your world, would you normalize before, or would you normalize before you publish to the broker, or would you extract all the data from the broker and then republish it?
I would love to publish contextualized data only, but in a real world, I don't think that's possible. Especially if we move to a point where OEMs are going to publish directly into a broker, and then I think that would be great. But there's a lot of logistical communication challenges around that to get in the format you want. I normally find you're going to need some sort of translation gateway to get the context. And it's normally easier to just publish the raw data from the device. It goes into the semantic hierarchy, raw data, and from there, that's normally the first step I do. And from there, then we'll take context, and then if we mightn't put context on all the data initially, but we can always go back and get it. So yeah, it normally depends on the case. I would love now. If I'm talking about if I'm talking about machinery, shop floor. If I'm talking about a CMMS or a level 3 type system, I would expect it to be getting published with the context on it. I put more onus on those suppliers to do it. But again, a lot of the time you only have API access, and you have to, you do a get, you pull it in, you provide the context, and then you publish. Change management. A lot of people don't think about this until someone's overwritten a topic. How a new topic's and structures, what's the version control, what do you do if you decide you want to add more metadata into your standard payload? How do you manage that? What do you do with old payloads? And there's ways around it. And then, data ownership. Someone has to own it. Someone has to be responsible for the standards. Someone has to be responsible for who can publish what, when, normally you allow anybody extract data, but that's not always the case. I know one large unified namespace where it's different companies are accessing the same namespace, and it's a water system, and you're allowed access the information from upstream of you, which is provided from other customers, but not downstream. So they had to do quite a complicated, governance. So these are the things, the boring things perhaps, that we don't want to do, and people want to jump in. Let's publish, great. Let's subscribe, and we'll put AI. But if you're not thinking about these things at the start, and we go back. This is what I call the 12 weeks to getting value program. Before someone asks, I think it's very achievable. The biggest problem normally is, you have a 2-week delay here waiting for a customer or waiting for a PO, or waiting for something else. But week 1, you assemble the team. You will, and then this aligning the vision and strategy, inventorying the business, and setting the technical requirements. These 3 weeks, and we'll go into more detail, are part of what I would class as a digital transformation maturity assessment. That's where someone like me comes along and helps you put together a bit of documentation of what do we want to achieve, what's our strategy, why are we doing this, and then technically, where are we now, where do we need to go. We'll go into more detail in a minute. We'll get ready for the proof of concept. And then, this is what a proof of concept typically is. We're going to connect systems and collect. We're going to start storing data. We're going to start making our dashboards. And then we're going to start testing. Sometimes that's in a nice test environment. Sometimes it's not, because we need to extract the data. We do deploy, we do some training, and we start to review outcomes. Yes, it's a push. Yes, it's a sprint. I wouldn't go straight into one. Normally, it gets pushed out with delays to be about 15 weeks, but I think, very doable. This is the same information, just differently. So, trick yourself. What are those steps in a bit more detail? And these ones, the first 3 I put together. Defining a digital strategy, inventorying your business, and defining your minimum technical requirements. That's going back to the large consultant report where they say, 100,000, please. Oh, you have 5 plants, 500,000. And I've read some of those reports, and they're abysmal. So in Ireland, there's a tax break where companies can get 5,000 euros back out of spending 6,750 to do a digital assessment. So I charge 6,750 because that's the tax-free amount. It's a little bit of a stretch, but that's the sort of, it's a two weeks to go on site, see the site, talk to people, write the report. That's as long as it should take. If anybody is talking to consultants where it's kind of months, run, you go down the wrong track. So, and the first thing there, we're going to define our digital strategy. We're going to inventory the business. Where are we? We're going to define the minimum technical requirements. And that's normally pretty quick because it doesn't really change that much from company to company. Sometimes it's more convincing people. And then we'll start talking about carrying out a proof of concept. So, setting a digital strategy. This is really, really important. Everybody wants to do digital transformation. And then when you ask people why, they look at you funny. And partly it's because there's people like me who stand up here who say, you have to digitally transform or your company won't exist in 10 years or 5 years. And then I ask you, why do you want to digitally transform? So what are the opportunities that we can get if we can start to digitally transform? And by that I mean break down digital silos so we get the right information in the right format to the right people when they need it. That could be operators, showing operators their efficiency live, showing a plant supervisor a dashboard that shows all of the machines, their current speed, if they're stopped, and it flashes red after it's been stopped for 10 minutes, so they know, oh, I need to go down and talk to Michael. There's a problem on the plant floor. I'm working with one customer at the moment, and they're in the medical device field. They have one of their batch records needs 900 pieces of manually entered data to get a batch record. And they're scaling up. They're being asked by their management to do more with less. And they're going, we need to have an electronic batch record to be able to operate in 2 years' time, 3 years' time. So everything I'm doing with them has that goal in the end. We're going to take different steps. We're going to go on different journeys. But it's always, how does this service the better goal of managing our quality so that they can manage? Other companies it'll be about production. They'll need to lower the cost of production, and that's their driver. So it's what I call the North Star. It's what guides you. It's when you've got a difficult decision, you can go back to it and go, oh. So, and I think appropriately for the day, I go to ChatGPT, here's the company, tell me everything, here's our problems, and it gives you 5 or 6 different ones, and you can then take it and refine it and make it your own. But again, I've seen 3-day workshops on a digital strategy statement, and I don't think they give you something much better than those, which was 10 minutes with with ChatGPT, myself, and the customer. So then we want to inventory the business. I use Walker Reynolds Digital Maturity Transformation Assessment. Other people use Siri. Other people do their own thing. I think it's so much better to let you get one done and you ask yourself the questions rather than which one you follow. But what we're trying to do is understand your capabilities. What do you do now? Understand what are the pain points, what's causing you problems. I need to update this. I've been challenged recently, and I think it's a very engineer thinking. It's stop talking about problems. Engineers, we always see problems. We have to see opportunities. That's back to how we get the funding for our ideas. So document the strengths, very important. What are we good at? And then we're going to prioritize the action. And then I like to try, there's a kind of a curve here from, nothing at the end to a Tesla at the end, and where you score on the mean. But the purpose of this, as much as it is about the learning, it's to align your team around a clear transformation roadmap, that everybody in the team knows why we're doing it. So that customer I spoke about earlier, everybody knows, okay, quality, electronic batch record, that's the goal. So nobody brings up questions about, what about revalidation, which is going to be a pain and a nightmare. It's a life science, but they know they have to do it. So now it's baked in. That is the table of contents of my digital transformation report that I do. The way I do it is, we have a set of questions. I make it in an Excel sheet. When we're talking with maintenance, we ask them the questions. We write down all the notes. I do it, and my client does it, and then into a large language model, get that to be summarized, and then use it to drive the report, which means it takes about 4 hours from when I leave site to get a report, which writing a report would normally take a week. So these are the things that we look at, understanding the current state, what's the strategy, and how are we going to get there. These sort of things, what are the current state, what are we trying to get to, and what's the gap? It's gap analysis. What's good, what's bad. There's no setting key targets. I might just That's important. Please don't take a photo of that, so there's some customer information. And the same here, some strategy statements. But I think we'll go through these. Here then, you share it out. Here's the type of information you should be getting and you should be understanding. Here's what we're good at. Here's what we're bad at. Here's what our strategy is. This is my mental architecture. I have loads of these drawings. I have one which I meant to add in, but I didn't, where in the middle you have 3 people and they're running around with clipboards. Because that's the architecture that a lot of plants currently have. But to me, they all tend to have the same. We have stuff on the plant floor that we need to get in any way we can normally. So that here we're going to be doing S7. We're going to be some machines we're ingesting CSV files and we're using Node-RED to transport. We're going to have a broker which is sitting here, and we're going to really try and from there use MQTT as our preference. And in this case, Tulip is the HMI gap. That's what's going to get us to the operator. This is again, very typical, as I mentioned earlier. You start with a sprint. We're looking at OE and downtime. We'll probably then need to add on a bit of downtime. We won't get it all done in the first sprint. And then we'll start to bring in quality control. And these are as we're going to bring in more and more machines as we go on. That's the bit. Okay. So this is again typically how I would approach architecture and there. So normally on a site, this is a multi-site. We have a lot of machines today, and we're going to add in edge devices. We're going to add in an edge device running Linux with Docker, and sometimes we have a broker, sometimes it's Mosquito, sometimes it's Hive Edge, sometimes it's something else. Sometimes at the edge you'll have an influx database because you need to buffer a bit of information. What you put in there really depends on the use case, but the idea that you have some compute at the edge, you then bring it up. We're going to have a historian here. We're using Timebase. We're using Mosquito because we don't have full financial backing yet, and we're going to use Grafana to do our dashboarding. And actually, just in case, as you're building, if you're not thinking about, so we're going to introduce. I'll show you the aim in a sec. We're going to firewall our plant off from our corporate stuff in a second. Actually, we might even go. We'll go to the zoom out view. So we have here each of the plants where we'll have a local broker, a small bit of time storage, and some local visualization. We want to build, this is new, this is what's missing in our customer. They had their business network, which is everything, their mail servers, their SharePoints, all of the office stuff. They had their manufacturing network, and then they started going, oh, we have some software we need to install. So that has to go on the business network. So we're introducing, and we're doing typical, Purdue model we're segregation, and we're going to have this central orchestration layer. We're going to have Portainer to do our Docker deployments. We're going to have a centralized Node-RED to provide some context or do all the tasks we might need to do. When we get to this point, and we are going to start leveraging Hive. I wouldn't necessarily. I think once you go enterprise, it's the choice. We're all here today, so I don't need to justify that. Tulip and FlowFuse will be running in the cloud. Again, I think if you want to build scalable architecture and you're going to use Node-RED, which a lot of people do, you're going to want to think about FlowFuse very early on, because otherwise you have 200 individual flows on 200 individual machines, and how you keep those, how do you update them when you change your payload structure or something like that. So, excuse me. So, there's some REST API management to access some other systems. But again, we'll have a historian, we'll have a standard more SQL database for functions, and we'll add in Grafana for some visualization. You can build the same thing with other tools, obviously. This particular example is, we're in the 12th week, we're in low cost, we haven't got commitment from a corporate backer yet, so we're trying to prove value, so we're trying to spend as little as we can. But they are some of the things that I really be thinking about for that container. Again, we're going to want to be looking at AI in the future. We want to be thinking about, I better start speeding up, and then that's the same thing. So minimal technical requirements, for me, these are the non-negotiables. They're a little bit different to what other people sometimes call the minimum technical requirements, which don't go far enough. The first one, open and accessible data. If anybody is a course and they haven't done this yet, write into all your purchase agreements, all the data in the system has to be accessible through an open format. MQTT, if you can do it, great. If not, an API or OPC. If it's Modbus, I'm happy, but I want to be able to get all the data. I've been quoted, 20, 30,000 per machine to get access to 10, 15 data points, even sometimes. We want an edge-driven architecture. We want to be thinking about nodes pushing data to the center so that other systems can use it. We really want to have that single source of truth. Where do we go to get data? Well, it's in there. If we want information from any system, this single source of truth should be our first point. And then, of course, we want to have a semantic hierarchy. We've spoken about that. To do that, I would always, as part of my add-in, I have a specification that I give to people. Well, this is how you integrate it, and it's to write down and cover off things like, what's the enterprise name, what's the site, what are the areas. Simple naming, but again, it gets often forgotten. What data has to be transmitted? People say, oh, all data should be transmitted. I'm going, we can't do all data. If you say all data, no one ever gives you all the data. So I like to write this. One big one is, one way I think of it, if the operator can see a value or an operator can push a button, I want to know that value they can see, and I want to know they push the button. If you've just got that, that's 90% of the really key information. And there's some other ones there. I think as I go on, any data sent between PLCs. So if you have a comments between two PLCs, yeah, we'll send that up to the broker, and we'll work through the data payload format. It should be written down somewhere. Sometimes, and I don't always, when I'm creating a UNS at the top level, we'll have a little topic which is payload structure, and we'll put in, this is the standard payload structure. Or I haven't done yet, I've thought I could put this entire document in as a JSON maybe. And rather, so if anybody wanted to, you make a retained topic, now you can pull it back. So this is a little bit of the repeat, so we'll go quickly, but I think it shows you start off with open, these are things we want open, hub and spoke, we want a lightweight. Ming, I like that little joke. Again, I said, I draw this drawing a lot, but there it is. You may have no money, you're trying to prove it, and you're going to put in, you connect some PLCs, you have a gateway, and you're going to derive some value. Another very common architecture, this is what I call ignition does everything. And I know some people, and they have a single plant, and it works really well for them. I don't think it works past that plant. And then you get up to one that's more bespoke. You've got to get, you're really starting to look at larger systems. You've got to get the right system. But the great thing is, all of these can come together into a corporate, and you've got, where you have enterprise tasks. But again, because, the systems up here, because we've written down the payload structure, can read the data from here and know what it is and know the context and, know that. So we connect plans together, we can leverage reliable apps like ERP planning, etc. I think that's a repeat. Okay, I'm only a few slides left and only a few minutes. So these are where I see the pitfalls of people who've built a unified namespace, and I think they will struggle to get some AI solutions from it. A lack of governance. So because nobody owns it, there's no governance, and things are a mess in there. Different parts of the plant have different payload structures. It's really hard. The semantic hierarchy, it doesn't really reflect the business. They have all of the dough forming put in one area, but there's actually two different dough forming buildings, and they're in, they're quite different for certain reasons. Inconsistent payloads, as I said, having a key pair, value, units, the metadata maybe. Is it an RTD or is it a temperature, a 40-20 milliamp sensor? Could be very important context later on when you're looking at different, in particular use cases that can be important. Too many sources publishing to the same topics. Probably best to have one publish to each topic, even if you have to have in your topic kind of publisher 1, publisher 2, publisher 3. If you had, two values reading the same thing. And then, there's no historic backfill. It's only live model. So you're going to have that clean historical content. And that's part of the problem. If you do it badly today and you set up and in 2 years' time, you're planning to go you can't go back and add the context in easily into your historian, even if you store the data. So to me, if you just have a unified namespace, what are the things that you could add in that could really, really help? And this is all things that add, to me, context and scalability. So obviously, you're going to need a historian or a time series database to capture your history. Graph-based content models, a graph model that describes the business, describes the relationships, describes the context. When you're starting small, if you can add it in, great, and it'll grow with you. It's not a type of thing I'd like to try and do for an entire plant late on, to add that context. Metadata, registry, something that'll track what metadata we have, where it lives. And by the way, starting off, a lot of this can be paper, when we can add it in, we can get tools as we go. Access control and data lineage, it's something to talk about most of the time. I think when people stand up an entity broker, they don't think about access control. They don't think about limiting. Anybody here set up an entity broker? You have. Yeah. The first time when you started, were you thinking about access control? Were you thinking about publishing? Okay, some people were, but and then you're going to start looking at training a pipeline. That's okay. We got the questions. So I thought I had I must have lost. I thought I had a summary in there. But as I said, to summarize, you've got to start thinking about context early when you're doing that proof of concept. So I think start quick. I don't like the idea of fail fast. You shouldn't be failing in that proof of concept. But if you spend 20, 30, 40,000 on a proof of concept and said, actually, we've got to get rid of it, it doesn't fit, I think that is worth the value. You will lose way more value going the old way and having a $5 million project. The learnings there would be invaluable. But, when you're building out your unified namespace, follow some of those principles, get the context in early, think about what's going to happen in the future. And I think you'll really set yourself up for success with that AI. So any questions? About 5 minutes. I, as usual, talk too long. It's an Irish problem. Yeah.
Is there a which one will help you to define the UNS? With best practices?
So when I'm programming my, so when I'm doing Node-RED programs, I have a ChatGPT project typically, and first thing I do is add in my specification. Says here's my rules for my unified namespace. Maybe I'll throw in, and I'll give it as much context as I can. I would love to make my own large language model and have it hosted, but as I said, I am all of the company. So finding the time to do that among everything else is probably a little bit of a way. If I was a larger company, I'd be saying absolutely. I have some friends, they've got 200 system, people working in system integrator, and I'm kind of, why haven't you built your own large language model, trained on all of your own projects, trained in the way you want to do things with your specifications? So I would strongly recommend that you train up your own tool for that, to add it in. But the first thing you have to do is write it down. And I think a lot of people forget to do that until they get into trouble, and then they're trying to reverse. So thanks.
In the beginning, you said that one of the best things and the worst thing was having roast peanuts by scalability. And then what he insults asked about as well regarding where we could publish this, if it was inside the Unified Namespace, it's called OWL. And then most PMs talked about having essentially a schema or the point spec, for instance. Yes. Right. So my question is, how you log usually in about 12 weeks period? Yeah. My question is, what happens that?
So I suppose what the real point I was trying to make was, if in the 12 weeks you're thinking about what's going to happen next, you're saying, okay, I can create an OE dashboard solution with some downtime analysis with no schema, throw it in, and it'll work, and it will look just as performant as one that doesn't have it. But what happens after 12 weeks normally is there's a couple of things that will happen. One, you're going to roll out that same solution to more machines. Two, you're going to add more functionality to the machine, and you're going to build out your typically it's building out an MES layer functionality, because I think only 30% of manufacturers today have a proper MES or have MES functionality. And the reason I say you need to have by writing down your model, your business schema, a flow through of how your materials are made, all of these things, it means that when the project I'm working on is working and somebody says, oh, we're bringing in a CMMS and we want the CMMS to integrate, we'd say, okay, we have a central broker, we want you to communicate to that, here's the schema, here's the format, here's how we do it, and then we can start to plan that out. Or if somebody is doing an energy management, and this is happening actually at the customer, they're bringing in energy management, I'm saying, okay, you have an energy management system, great. Make sure that we're getting all the data in context into the right thing. So, I mean, that's why, if you start to make rules, other people will have to follow the rules because they haven't written them, I suppose. And that's what generally happens is, after the 12 weeks, you do your proof of concept, it's been a roaring success, everyone loves it. That always happens. More people want in, more people want to add functionality. People say, can't do this, can't do that. And then when you start to talk to other people and other teams, you need to have written down what you did. In one way, it's like commenting the code base. So that's I think the important thing. But if you have that rule base, then I suppose to bring back, that allows like in the previous talk, that allows your LLM that you're creating in a year's time to ingest all the rules and understand the context. Because what I've seen have to happen sometimes is people making up the context that they created because they never documented it along the way. You asked one earlier. We'll go back to it. Sorry.
How and where do you use the manage your scheme for the projects?
Typically, I suppose I mean, it's typically done through, I suppose we create, as I said, we create those rules that we have in the schemas and workflow, and then I don't have so when you're saying specifically models, what exactly are you? Yeah, I mean,
machine models, for instance.
Yeah. So I mean, if we're creating So normally there'll be a document that describes that, and sometimes it's a page. Here's the values we're reading and here's what they mean. Then where you create, I suppose, a gateway where you're extracting that, typically for me it's a Node-RED flow. So that's why I like to have, okay, here's my Node-RED subflow I've created in FlowFuse that all of my instances will inherit. I think where you do that really depends on the software you're using. If you're writing your own Python scripts, yeah, you can use Git or you can do something else. If you're using MEng.Sc or you're using something else, you have to live with the tools that it has, for that. But you definitely do want to have that sort of idea of object orientated from the early on. I didn't mention it. I probably maybe thought it's a given, but what I mean by that is that you want every gateway for a motor to be as similar as possible. And then when you change and add something in, that will cascade down to all of your sub motors. The same for temperature, same for. You tend not to have to do one for ERP because they're all so different. You only have one, but anything where you've got a lot of equipment. Right? Are you?
Just like some question of relations from you currently is I agree with you when it comes to having smaller and leaner projects to get going. And I would say that some parts of my company would also agree, but large part of my company is much more comfortable with super mega large projects that are they tend to sell, even though they end up in a mess, they are still more comfortable in those projects. How do I talk to colleagues about this? So it's been treat a bit.
I suppose when I'm talking to people about that, I can only try and describe the scars I have from doing it. I don't want to say I'm still traumatized from that project, but it still affects how I approach things. It's actually why I'm speaking here today. But to me, I think anybody who's worked on that sort of project will acknowledge the issues about, and I think the biggest problem for me is it's the momentum. Once you get going, you can't decide to do it. So if you want to do a project like that, I would try and say, can we get that as a project, but do it in an agile way where we're not saying, we have all of these sprints and we have a plan, but we can change the plan as we go. We don't tie ourselves in. So we're going to do, instead of doing one sprint for, 50,000, we're going to do 1,000 sprints for 50 million. Okay, right? Very big. And you say, okay, well, here's the plan. Here's my sprints. We've got 10 factories. Okay, so each of them we're going to have, and you kind of, but yeah, in 2 years' time, and you're only ever going to look 3-4 sprints ahead and change and change and change. But, that's the way. I think it's. I can understand why, especially if you're not sure where you get the next funding. If you're always asking, can I have another bit? Can I have another bit? Can I have another bit? And I think that's an important thing to explain to financial people. This is just the first step. We have 200 more steps, but we're doing it in a way that is much more cost effective for you. I always ask, what do you do if 5% of the project in, you find that your customer or your client, they're not delivering? It's not going to work. And what happens? You power through, you try and solve it, it goes bad, you get legal involved. Now there's a customer success manager added in, and then someone else is added in, and the company who's doing it, they're trying to just get finished and get out and get paid because they're now losing money every day they're on the job. They're no longer worried about you having a good solution. So I think you just have to, try and educate people, try and explain the pitfalls, get people who've done it. I've never seen someone with successful 5-10 million digital transformation. And that's probably the way. Okay, I'm being kicked out, I think. I'll be around. Please come talk to me. Thank you very much. It was great.